You have a story to tell, but how do you write it in a way that comforts you and comforts someone else? That's what we're going to talk about today on crafting your caregiving story. Welcome, everyone. I'm Denise Brown, and we're going to go through around 40 minutes, and it's going to include some work that you can complete as we connect today. Thanks to those who are joining me live. We're actually meeting on a Saturday morning. And I appreciate those who got up early to join us. Beth is here. She's one of our soon-to-be certified caregiving consultants. So it's great to have you with us. Okay, so let's start. Just a little bit about me. I started working with family caregivers in 1990, and I also was a family caregiver for my parents. And I launched one of the very first online caregiving communities. And when I did that in 1996, one of my priorities was to ensure the stories of family caregivers were highlighted and featured. At that time, it was all about experts, doctors, lawyers, other experts, financial planners talking about what caregiving was like. And I wanted to make sure that the voice of the family caregiver shared what it was like. So I was one of the first to really add in private journals that family caregivers wrote on my community and blogs, later blogs. And what's interesting is the reason I started working with family caregivers was because of the stories they told me. So I had a job in 1990 supporting family caregivers by helping them take a break. So we had funding in the state of New Jersey, where I lived, through the casinos, interestingly enough, to provide services so that family caregivers could take a break. So what I did is I met with family caregivers to determine how did they want to use funding. In essence, they received a grant to take a break. And as we worked through the plan for them to take a break, they told me their story, and I could not hear enough caregiving stories. It was so compelling to me. I never heard the same story twice. So I think about why we tell stories. And I'd love for you to share another reason that you'd add to this bullet list in the chat room. So I think about telling stories to release an emotion, so it's healing for us. We tell stories to connect to others who might have a similar story. We might tell a story to resolve elements of the story that didn't make sense, and we want to make sense of them. A story can inspire us, and it can inspire others. And I think we also want to think about how can we advocate for change, especially around caregiving issues, with stories, because we know when we tell a story about how a change can impact the family caregiver for the better, helps in our advocacy efforts. And I'm curious if there's another reason you would add to this bullet list. Let me pull up the chat room. Oh, Beth is giving me the thumbs up that it seems complete. Yeah, I try to get as complete as I can, but I always feel like I might miss something. And what's helpful is to ask, what might I have missed? I guess I'll think of another reason, and that is to document. And it can be this ongoing record of our life, our personal experience, that then becomes an historical book of our life. It also could be a historical book of a particular time in our life, like caregiving. So storytelling can also be about recording our own personal history, as well as the history of our caree, right? Because we are the family historian when we're in a caregiving situation. So we know that sometimes the story is for an audience and sometimes it's for us. So let's start with us. Let's start writing for us. And I think about stories as having a beginning, middle, and end. And if you think about it from the perspective of a chapter, for instance, within a book, the chapter itself has a beginning, middle, and end. And then the chapters combine make the book. I think sometimes we feel like the whole story is what has a beginning, middle, and end. And in truth, the stories within the whole story have a beginning, middle, and end. And if we look at it from that perspective, I think what happens is it makes it easier to write our story because we realize what we're writing is many stories. And then it also helps us stay focused on what's the story to write today. If you think about it, you can write a story about each of your days. And in a day, there's a beginning, middle, and end. So let's think about it with 6 words. We use this technique regularly. We write 6-word stories. Just a reminder that if you really think, oh, I need more than 6 words, this is going to be impossible, that's okay, because guess what? You have hyphens. You can hyphenate as many words as you want to make one word, and then that becomes your 6-word story. So you have unlimited hyphens. You have 6 words, but you have hyphens. So it could be a 20-word story, but with the hyphens, you get it to 6 words. And I think that's good. So let's think about it from the perspective of a moment in time during your caregiving experience. Yes, Beth, that's writing. Yes, the hyphens with the 6-word stories is like German smashing words together. Okay, so we're going to look at what's a moment in time that really is a story you want to record through writing. And again, there's many reasons why you'd want to do this. It doesn't matter right now. It only matters that you pick some significant event that happened. A couple suggestions. It could be diagnosis day. It could be a particular holiday. It could be a significant moment. Something I've been thinking about that I haven't done yet is writing stories about my time in the elevator in my parents' apartment building. Because when I was riding that elevator to the 3rd floor, I was constantly getting up courage, steeling myself for what I would see, and also bracing myself for what I would tell them. For instance, my brother died a year before my mom and 2 years before my dad. And I was the one who went to tell them. And I remember being in that elevator and just feeling so claustrophobic by what I would have to tell them. I could write a story about what it's like to be in an elevator knowing that what's coming next is not good. When you have this moment, this day, this event that you'd like to write about go ahead and just give me a thumbs up in the chat room. And if you want to say what it is that you want to write about, go ahead and say, I'm writing about, and then name what it is. A holiday, event, a moment, an experience, a place. The elevator is a place. Okay. So here's what 6-word stories could sound like when you think about a moment, an experience, an event, a conversation, a situation. I felt swallowed by too much. Pressure of preventing and predicting overwhelmed. I lost it because they left. Alone with tears while they celebrated. I lost it because they left is my experience on the day that the hospital bed arrived for my mom. My siblings left once they were like, okay, the bed is put together, the bed is has arrived. We've put sheets on the bed. Our work here is done. And they left, and I knew that the work had only just begun. And internally, not externally, because I didn't want to upset my parents, I was like, oh my gosh, they're leaving me to do all what's required next, which is continence care, making sure that my mom is comfortable in the hospital bed. Mhm. And then the other event that inspired Alone with Tears While They Celebrated was a holiday. I was going through a difficult time taking care of my parents, and my parents were there, and I was visibly having difficulty. My parents were visibly having difficulties that I was trying to manage, and they were just clueless, just like oblivious. They were celebrating the holidays if nothing was wrong. I actually did stand in my brother's entryway to his house after I settled my parents into the car. We were leaving after the event, and I went back in to get something, and I said, doesn't anyone see what I'm going through? Doesn't anyone get it? And they just looked at me like, anyway. Okay, so Beth is sharing that she's writing about her husband's critical care event. One thing to keep in mind as you're writing about these events, I think about it as being inspired by something that happened during caregiving. And it can be helpful to write about the impact on us. That's the meat of the story. What did it do to us? Because then it becomes something different than just sharing a timeline versus sharing an impact. And if you have 6-word stories that you'd like to share in the chat room, go ahead and start putting them in there. And if you're watching the archive, you can share your 6-word stories in our comments section and on our community, caringourway.com. We post all our archives on YouTube and caringourway.com. Oh, wow. Okay, Beth has her 6-word story. I stopped because he was erased. Wow. Wow. You can see what that sentence does. It starts a chapter. It starts a book. Wow. If you wanted to start in smaller bites, it starts a blog post. I also think that we are talking about writing as a narrative. We can also think about writing as prose and poetry. That can be the first line of a poem. How powerful would that be? His room was so quickly sanitized, Beth continues. Yeah, yeah. I think we've all had that experience in an emergency room where we see the housekeeping team go into an empty room and sanitize it, and you think, oh, I wonder what was significant that happened in that room. And so when you write that, we have our own understanding of what that impact is like. Okay. As we go through the rest of our program, you are welcome to keep writing and sharing in the chat room. So I think about these 6-word stories as where we begin. And now we're going to put in the middle. I think about it as coloring around the lines. Who, what, why, when, how. Adding in the details of the story. Beth has got these great 6-word stories, and so now she can fill it in terms of who she saw, what they were doing, and what was happening for her. And as you start to color in between the lines of your story, and really your story has lines, and so you're filling in with color, you're thinking about how to create an image from your lines. So we read to visualize, and you're creating that visualization for us when you color in between the lines. As your own writer, you are the writer of your own story. You can also decide if, for instance, the who, what, why, when, and how only needs to be a why, or maybe it only needs to be a when. What I love about coloring between the lines is you have a choice as to the colors you add. So who, what, why, when, how are elements of your story, and you use the elements in the way that best serves the story. And as you continue to write, if you need help thinking about what to write, you can use our writing wheel. And I've included 8 words that could prompt you to write. For instance, you could write a 6-word story about each of these words. Look at your 8 6-word stories and then think, I want to write more about this one. And then you pull that one out and then you add in your color, which is your middle, so that you can get to the end. And if you're thinking, I'm not sure how to end it, write another 6-word story about the end. What I like about these 6-word stories is it makes us really get into the detail. We are focused. It's concentrated. We can't add in the fluff that can be distraction. We're getting right into what it is. You could write a 6-word story about the beginning, the middle, and the end. And then fill in the color between the beginning, middle, and end. If you're thinking, oh my, this is really interesting, but I'm starting to feel nervous that I have to turn this into a book, and I want to let you know you turn it into whatever it is you turn into that feels right for you. It could be blog posts that you write once in a while. It could be that you just think about short stories that you write once in a while. It could be prose and poetry that you write. Or it could be that you pull it all together into something that feels longer, like a book. It's yours. That's what's so great about it. In a time that feels like everything is about others, this is really about you and what you want to do with what you write. Okay, what I think is interesting about this is that the stories that we write for ourselves can become the stories that we share with others. And there's ways that we can share stories beyond just blog posts. So it could be because of these stories you have, you'd like to be a guest on a podcast or a guest on a YouTube show. So, what does that look like when the stories that you've been writing become the entree into being a guest to share your stories? And I wanted to give you some insights about when you elevate from a writer to a storyteller, what that could look like. And I think about a storyteller as really using concise communication that captivates us because we feel connected. And if anybody has a different definition of a good storyteller, I'd love for you to share it in the chat room or in the comments section. What I think about a good storyteller with concise communication is that it's easy for us to follow the story. When it's too wordy, we get lost. If it stays concise, we stay found within the story. And the good storyteller wants us to find themselves in our story. And the connection that we create as a storyteller is the connection of emotion, for instance, that we all feel, the difficult emotions, the joyful ones. We also can connect through humor. When someone tells us a story that makes us laugh, that laughter connects all of us. And then when someone tells us a story that helps us better understand ourselves and our own story, oh, we want more of that. Because we've had a story stuck in our head that might not make sense. And when someone shares something similar in a way that helps us connect to that story, and then we understand them, which means we understand ourselves, wow. Something that happened decades ago that was really powerful for me was spending time with my grandmother, who was erratic, unwell, and difficult. And because of that, my father and his brother had a very estranged relationship with her. She was in and out of our life for her life. And when she was 95, she was diagnosed with bladder cancer. And I thought, I don't know her. I would like to understand her. I have had experiences with her that were frightening for me as a child. My dad was frightening to me because of how he interacted with her. And so I had that part of the story, but I didn't have her part of the story. And what happened is they put her on antidepressants. And so she was regulated. So I went to visit her every Saturday and I sat and listened to her talk about her stories. And what I got was my father's pain. What I only had experienced before was my father's rage, and I didn't understand it. But then, in connecting with my grandmother by just sitting and listening to her tell stories, I understood the pain and grief behind my father's rage. And then what happened is I understood myself. So, in listening to my grandmother, I gained insights about my father, which helped me understand myself. So, I wouldn't think of my grandmother as a storyteller, except she was. She was a storyteller for me in a way that became very profound. We might have other storytellers in our life that we just don't know are storytellers. And with this realization that we are connected by storytellers and might have storytellers in our life, it helps us do something that is listen. If we want to be good storytellers, we focus on listening. For writing, we read. For storytelling, we listen. Isn't that interesting? I think about In 1990, sitting in family caregivers' homes at their dining room table, listening to their story and how that changed me. So we want to really also focus on listening. We want to listen to the stories that others have because it becomes transformative for us. And just think about that story I just told you about my grandmother. I put my grandmother as the storyteller, but guess what? I was the storyteller of that story. So listening actually gives you stories. Isn't that interesting? And if we think about being intentional in how we listen, then we are curious. We are not judgmental. When I sat and listened to my grandmother, I didn't have a thought in my head that said, but why did you ruin my father? I just listened. I just wanted to better understand her. So I was very curious. I focused on her story and I released my story about what I knew of her. Then I asked her a lot of good questions, all the questions I could think of. And then I just let her tell me. What's interesting about my grandmother, she was not interested in her grandchildren, like at all. So my parents had 5 children. They had 5 children within 7 years, and my grandmother thought that was horrible. And she focused on the oldest two because all she wanted my parents to have was 2 children. So for her, she only wanted them to have 2 children. So she only bothered to really know the first two. And I was the fourth. So sometimes she didn't remember my name. She didn't know when my birthday was. And that was my experience with her when I was a child. And so when I was adult thinking, I need to know her. When I would go to visit her, I released the stories that I had experienced with her before so I could experience her now. And what's interesting is it did transform the relationship I had with her. There was a Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, I went to visit her and she was resting and napping on her bed. And so I walked quietly into her room. She resided in a nursing home and I gently nudged her and she opened her eyes and she said, "Oh, I was just dreaming of you and hoping you would come to visit me." So the childhood of the grandmother who was evil became the story of the grandmother who became my friend later in life. So I tell you this as a way to thank my grandmother because I really learned about how we can listen in a way that transforms the relationship. So when you have an opportunity to listen, someone is giving you a gift. And I just want to mention that we might have talkers in our life that make it difficult to listen. I don't mean to listen to someone who is just talking to talk. I'm really encouraging you to listen to those who share something really vulnerable and deep and impactful. Someone who carries a story and doesn't feel like they have a good listener in their life. That's you. If you're interested in learning more about how to be a good listener, we do something twice a year, the Caregiving Listener Project. We actually provide training to help you be a good listener. So think about that. So as you think about becoming a storyteller, focus first on becoming a listener because that will help you become a really great storyteller. So listening to other changes us. And because we change, our stories transform. The other piece about this, which is really interesting, so we are going through a journey here where we're writing for ourselves, we're thinking about where that can go, we're thinking about how to tell stories. So now we're moving into listening, and now we're moving into a more broad perspective of why we write and tell stories. We first started out with what does it do for us? And that is so important for us to benefit from writing and storytelling. And now we're going to actually move it into the next dimension, which is when our stories move from being about me to being about us. And that's when the magic happens. Because that's when you move people. And when you connect with people by moving them, you have shifted their world. And wow, is that amazing? You shift your world in the process. So we first write for ourselves. When we see ourselves and others, we begin to write for them. And we see ourselves and others by listening. Yeah, I when I think about social media, for instance, it's all about me. And think about how powerful it is when it becomes about us. We feel better. We feel hopeful. We feel courageous. We feel empowered when it's about us. Dolly Parton has joined Substack, which I find fascinating. And this was one of the very first things she posted on Substack. And this is November 15th. She wrote this probably just 5 days ago. And I was so taken by this because I think it speaks to what we're really looking to do. And here's what she wrote. People don't come to see me be me. They come to see me be them. I am a writer who writes their stories. I feel for them because I am who they are. I just took 35 minutes in a workshop to just say exactly what she said in 3 sentences. If you wanted to, if you really like this idea of 6-word stories, you could actually break this up into probably 5 6-word stories. That's what she's done. Okay, my coffee tastes good today. So we are going to close for today. However, you are welcome to share in the chat room or unmute around what you've gained from our time together today. I'd love for you to share any insights, any aha moments you might have, as well as any next step for you. What's your next step with what we talked about today? And you can write with us on Caring Our Way. We do 6-word stories, 3-word journaling. We also have a special section for those whose caregiving experience has ended. And then our next Caregiving Listener Project is February 21st. And what an opportunity for you to tell a story and to be a listener to hear other stories. So you can do both. Okay, so what do you think? How did we do? Beth is giving me thumbs up. Oh, okay. So Beth is sharing she's going to focus on 6-word stories to write more powerfully. Yeah. Yeah. I'm wondering, Beth, if there is any kind of time in your day when it's easier for you to do this or routine around writing that's helpful.
Mm. Yeah, I think I've unmuted. I think that's been a challenge for me. Um, I am kind of liking being up and ready to roll at this time. And I've also, just to pull in from some other ideas that I've had things I've learned about at Carrying Our Way, is to be incorporate more of that doodling, the Zen tangles that you talked
Oh,
about in
yes.
another
Yes.
workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah, and see if I can't connect more with the emotions, because that's for me, I'm coming out of entrenched caregiving and burnout, and that is the part that's been tamped down. So, yeah, I think this is going to be really the next step for me, is to use these 6 word stories to reconnect with some of my emotions so I can actually have ideas about what to write about instead of being kind of in chaotic mode. Yeah.
What I also think is so powerful about 6 word stories during caregiving is it's 6 words
Mhm.
and it doesn't have to take longer than 5 minutes to just think about, wow, how would I describe what just happened in 6 words? And then you don't even have to make it a sentence. It could just be 6 words jump out at you, and then you pull each of those words to write more about it.
Right.
That could be really powerful too.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel a pressure to make it make sense and to be like super like that Churchill quote about public speaking. If I have 2 hours, I can start now, but if I only have 5 minutes, I'm going to need time to prepare. So
Yeah.
I think that's what's been daunting for me about the 6 words is it's like writing a haiku, but shorter. And oh, the more you truncate it, the harder it becomes. But I need to get past that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I understand that pressure to get it right, so to speak, because
Mm,
you feel the pressure of, I want people to really understand how hard and difficult and traumatic this was for me.
mhm,
And when you believe in your listener and reader, they will get it.
right, right. And
And, oh,
the
go ahead.
first one is what's the shitty first draft. Like
Yeah.
you're gonna craft it from there. So your reader, there's no reader except you at this point. It's you figuring things out to start with. So your 6 word story can be edited or changed or put on the shelf or made just for you or yeah, whatever.
And you can also think of your reader as being someone like you that has had similar experiences. And what they're bringing then into the reading is their insights about a similar situation. So you can release having to describe everything related, for instance, around a system, like how hard it is to do things in an emergency room or hospitalization. You can bring in a reader in your mind who already knows that.
Right.
And then you can be like, okay, I just have to get into the nitty gritty.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Someone else who's in the storm themselves. You're not
Yes.
trying to write. This is the problem when you're in entrenched or in the midst of all this caregiving and you become chaotic. And it's hard to describe to people around you. That's why you end up isolated. So start writing for that person who's chaotic,
Yes.
because they'll get it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I write what I call caregiving comforts, which are inspired by one word.
Hmm.
And I do those on Mondays and I post them on Caring Our Way. They're also a
Yeah.
podcast. They're
Yeah.
very short. They're very short.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it's
I
because,
subscribe on Podbean.
oh, do you?
Oh, yeah. I listen to them. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so awesome. And if you notice, there's not a lot of detail around situations because I
Hmm.
know you get it.
Right.
Okay, I think we're going to close. This was fun. I hope this was helpful.
Yes, it was for me. It's super helpful. It's put a new perspective on the 6 word stories for sure. I'm so glad that you did this and that I was able to come. So yeah, thank you.
And we post prompts on Caring Our Way to help you start with 6 word stories. So you can always visit Caring Our Way to look at all the 6 word prompts to help you start writing. And again, if you think, oh, I can't turn it into a sentence, just start with 6 words.
Right.
Okay, yes. Thank you guys so much for being here on a Saturday morning. This was awesome. Thank you, Beth.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to our other participants as well. I hope it was helpful for you guys. And thanks to those who are watching our replay, our archive. Okay, see you soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.